The orange glow of the neon sign, a winking coffee cup with the words Mel's Midnight Diner, bled through the rain-streaked window, painting streaks of liquid fire across the worn Formica tabletop. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose name was etched in cold steel on the sides of skyscrapers, stared into the swirling steam of a bowl of tomato soup she had no intention of eating. The diner was a universe away from the Lumina room, her usual haunt, with its hushed carpets, crystal chandeliers, and the oppressive silence of a table perpetually set for two. Here, the air was thick with the scent of old coffee and frying onions, the clatter of ceramic on steel, and the low murmur of conversations from the handful of other souls seeking refuge from the November storm. It was gritty, real, and in a strange way, less lonely than the pristine solitude of her penthouse. She was an anomaly in her tailored wool coat and silk blouse, an obsidian stone in a pile of river gravel, but no one paid her any mind. Here, she was just another person waiting out the rain. A sudden, sharp chime from the bell above the door cut through the diner's drone. A gust of wind, heavy with the smell of wet asphalt, swirled inside, carrying with it two figures that seemed to have materialized from the storm itself. A man, Leo Morales, stood hesitating in the doorway, his thin jacket and worn jeans plastered to his frame, dripping a puddle onto the checkered linoleum. Clutched to his chest, wrapped in the inadequate shelter of his arms, was a small boy, Finn, whose shivering was visible even from across the room. The child's face was pale, his eyes closed in an exhausted sleep, a dark fringe of hair pasted to his cold forehead. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, paused with a coffee pot in her hand, a flicker of pity warring with professional weariness. Other patrons glanced over, their curiosity fleeting, before returning to their own worlds. But Eleanor couldn't look away. She saw the man's shoulders, squared with a pride that was clearly losing its battle against desperation. She saw the raw, protective curve of his arms around his son, a shield against a world that had offered them no shelter. Leo's eyes scanned the room, not looking for a menu or a free table, but for a sliver of kindness. They passed over the other booths, over the counter, and then they landed on Eleanor. He took a hesitant step forward, his worn boots squelching softly on the floor. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a rough whisper, almost lost in the hiss of the grill. "Excuse me," he started, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. My son's hungry. He's so cold. Is it okay? Could we just sit for a moment? In the warmth?" The question was not directed at the staff, but at her, as if he had instinctively recognized that in this small, anonymous space, she was the one who held the power. He wasn't asking for food, not yet. He was asking for permission to exist, for a moment of grace. For Eleanor, a woman who dealt in billion-dollar acquisitions and hostile takeovers, the raw vulnerability of the request struck a chord she thought had long gone silent. She saw past the wet clothes and the muddy shoes. She saw a father's love, stripped down to its most essential, desperate form. If your heart is also aching for this man and his son, show some support and tap that like button. Without a word, Eleanor gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the approaching waitress. Then she slid over in the worn vinyl booth, gesturing with an elegant hand to the empty space opposite her. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of command. "No one should go hungry," she stated, her gaze meeting Leo's, holding it. "Nor eat alone." Leo froze for a second, his face a canvas of disbelief, relief, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. He managed a single grateful nod, too overwhelmed to speak, and carefully slid into the booth, arranging the sleeping Finn gently on the seat beside him before shrugging off his soaked jacket. The waitress, Brenda, seemed to understand immediately. Within minutes, 2 steaming bowls of the same tomato soup, flanked by grilled cheese sandwiches oozing melted cheddar, were placed on the table. The smell of warm bread and cheese filled the small space between them. Leo woke Finn gently, his calloused hands surprisingly tender. "Finn, buddy, wake up. There's food." The little boy's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented, and then his gaze fell on the sandwich. A slow, wondrous smile spread across his face, a sunrise after a long night. He ate with the pure, uninhibited joy of a child who had been truly hungry, his small hands clutching the warm sandwich as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Leo ate much more slowly, his movements measured, his eyes darting between his son's blissful face and the enigmatic woman across from him. The shame of his situation was a physical weight, but the relief was a current lifting him up. Eleanor watched them, a silent observer. The sight of Finn's contentment sparked something within her, a warmth that spread through her chest, thawing a place that had been frozen for years. "How long?" she asked softly, her voice losing its corporate edge. Leo swallowed a mouthful of soup, the warmth a shock to his system. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Since yesterday morning," he admitted, his voice low. "I lost my job, at the garage. They downsized. I pick up odd jobs when I can. But the rain, there's been nothing for 2 days." He stared down at his bowl, the confession costing him dearly. "We've been sleeping in the car. The shelters were all full." There was no self-pity in his tone, only the flat, exhausted recitation of facts. It was this dignity, this refusal to crumble completely, that resonated with Eleanor more than any sob story could have. She'd built an empire on calculated risks and unflinching logic. She saw strength and resilience in Leo Morales, qualities she valued above all others, even if the world had failed to recognize them in him. With a full belly and the warmth of the diner seeping into his bones, Finn started to chatter. He talked about his favorite things, drawing big red fire trucks, the way the swings in the park made his stomach feel funny, and watching his dad smile. "He doesn't do it much anymore," Finn confided to Eleanor in a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes wide and serious. The innocent observation struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. She looked at Leo, who was staring at his son with an expression of such profound love and pain that it made her own throat tighten. In that moment, a decision formed in her mind, swift and absolute. She had apartments all over the city, investment properties, corporate housing, all of them sitting empty, sterile and silent, just numbers on a balance sheet. They were meaningless assets. Here in front of her was a meaning she hadn't considered. She pulled out her phone, her movements precise and efficient. She typed a quick message. "I have an apartment," she said, her tone businesslike again, a shield for the unfamiliar emotion welling inside her. "A few blocks from here it's empty. It has 2 bedrooms, heat, hot water. You can stay there until you get back on your feet." Leo's head snapped up. His eyes widened, a storm of emotions passing through them, hope, suspicion, confusion, and finally, a flare of wounded pride. "Ma'am, we can't accept that. That's charity. We don't take charity." The words were firm, but his voice trembled. Eleanor put her phone down and looked at him, her gaze direct and unwavering. She saw the man, not the problem. She saw the father, not the charity case. Her voice was calm, cutting through his pride without shattering it, imbued with a quiet power that brooked no argument. "No," she said simply, her eyes holding his. "It's humanity." The first thing Leo noticed was the silence. Not the oppressive, cold silence of a night spent in the car, where every distant siren felt like a threat, but a soft, enveloping quiet that was filled with the promise of safety. Sunlight, thick and golden, streamed through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, joyful sprites. The apartment smelled of clean linens and something vaguely floral, a scent so foreign it felt like a dream. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he had woken up not to the gnawing ache of hunger or the biting chill of a November morning, but to the gentle warmth of a radiator hissing softly in the corner. On the floor, nestled on a plush beige rug, Finn was humming to himself, a set of colored pencils, left in a drawer as if by magic, clutched in his small hand. He was drawing a fleet of bright red trucks, their wheels impossibly large, their drivers all smiling. The sheer, unadulterated peace on his son's face was a balm to Leo's frayed soul. He moved to the small kitchen, his bare feet sinking slightly into the carpet, and found a bag of coffee beans and a grinder. The act of measuring the beans, the whirring noise of the grinder, the bloom of steam as hot water hit the grounds, It was a ritual of normalcy so profound it brought a lump to his throat. As he poured 2 mugs of milk for Finn and 1 of coffee for himself, the weight of the last few months seemed to lift, if only for a moment. They were warm. They were safe. It was while he was sipping the hot, bitter coffee that he saw it. A newspaper, folded neatly on a small end table left behind by a previous occupant. The Financial Times. He picked it up out of idle curiosity, his eyes scanning the columns of numbers and dense articles without much interest, until a photograph made him freeze. It was her, the woman from the diner. Her expression was different, colder, more calculated, her silver hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. The headline above the photo read, "Vance the Visionary, How Eleanor Vance Conquered Wall Street and Reshaped the City's Skyline." Leo's breath hitched. He read the first paragraph, then the second, his heart beginning to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Eleanor Vance, CEO and founder of Vance Industries, a global conglomerate with holdings in real estate, technology, and private equity, a titan of industry, a billionaire many times over, known for her ruthless business acumen and her near-total emotional detachment. The article spoke of her as a force of nature, a woman who didn't just play the game but fundamentally changed the rules. The Lumina Room, it mentioned in passing, was one of her countless properties, a personal project known as her Ivory Tower. The coffee mug trembled in his hand. He looked around the apartment, seeing it now through new eyes. This wasn't just an empty unit. It was a rounding error in a real estate portfolio worth billions. The kindness he had received, which had felt so personal and profound, now seemed like a casual, thoughtless whim from a woman for whom $1,000 was less than a penny. The warmth in the room turned suffocating. A wave of shame, hot and sickening, washed over him. He wasn't a man being helped by a kind stranger. He was a pathetic charity case for one of the most powerful people on the planet. He felt exposed, his poverty and desperation laid bare for the amusement of a queen. The thought that she might regret her impulsive gesture, that a phone call would come at any moment telling him to leave, coiled in his stomach like a serpent. Miles away, in a sterile boardroom on the 90th floor of the Vance Industries Tower, Eleanor Vance was staring at a projection screen without seeing it. A man in a $3,000 suit was droning on about market penetration in Southeast Asia, but her mind was filled with the memory of a small, chattering voice telling her about red trucks and the feeling of running in the park. She could almost feel the phantom warmth of a small hand in hers, see the ghost of a chocolate mustache on a child's upper lip. For decades, she had operated behind an impenetrable emotional wall, a no-touch policy that applied as much to her feelings as it did to her business dealings. Emotions were liabilities, messy variables in a world that demanded cold, hard logic. Yet, the raw, unvarnished despair in Leo Morales' eyes had bypassed her defenses entirely. His quiet dignity in the face of absolute destitution, his fierce, protective love for his son, it had stirred something in her, a long-dormant ache for a connection that wasn't transactional. The men in this room saw her as a symbol, a source of power or a threat. Leo had seen her as a person, just a person, sitting alone at a table for two. Projected returns for the next fiscal quarter are up 12%, the executive concluded, a note of triumph in his voice. Eleanor didn't even blink. "It's not enough," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the self-congratulatory atmosphere. The men shifted uncomfortably. She stood up, her gaze sweeping over them, seeing not collaborators, but components in a machine she had built. "The numbers are fine, the vision is stagnant." She walked to the window, looking down at the city sprawling below, a kingdom of glass and steel she had helped create. But for the first time, she wasn't seeing buildings. She was seeing the millions of lives unfolding within them, stories of struggle and hope she had long ago chosen to ignore. "That will be all for today." The moment the room was empty, she buzzed her assistant. "Martha," she said, her voice crisp, "I need you to find someone for me. His name is Leo Morales. He has a 6-year-old son named Finn. I don't have an address, but they are likely staying in my apartment on West 57th Street. Get me a number for him, immediately." When the phone in the apartment rang, its shrill, unfamiliar sound made Leo flinch. He let it ring twice, his mind racing. This was it. The call to tell him the game was up. He looked at Finn, now asleep on the sofa, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. For Finn, he would swallow his pride. He answered, his voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" A cool, professional voice on the other end introduced herself as Eleanor Vance's executive assistant. "Mr. Morales, Ms. Vance would like to meet with you this afternoon. At 2 o'clock. Can you be at the offices of the Vance Philanthropic Innovations Foundation?" She gave him an address on the Lower East Side. Anxiety warred with confusion. Not Vance Industries? A foundation? What did she want? To lecture him? To offer him a formal, humiliating handout he would be forced to refuse? "Why?" he asked, the word coming out harsher than he intended. There was a brief pause. "Ms. Vance believes you may be a person of interest for one of her new initiatives," the assistant replied, her tone unwavering. "A car will be waiting for you downstairs at 1:30. The lobby of the Vance Philanthropic Innovations building was nothing like the imposing marble and glass fortress of her corporate headquarters he had seen in the newspaper. It was bright, filled with natural light, and the walls were covered not with abstract art but with vibrant photographs of community gardens, children learning to code, and families moving into new homes. Still, Leo felt a profound sense of unease. His worn jacket and scuffed boots a stark contrast to the clean, efficient hum of the place. He was led not to a grand office, but to a simple workshop in the back of the building. The air smelled of grease and metal. Cars in various states of repair were raised on hydraulic lifts, and standing by a workbench, wiping her hands on a clean rag, was Eleanor Vance. She wore a simple grey pantsuit, no jewelry, her presence commanding but somehow less intimidating here. She got straight to the point. "In the diner, you mentioned you were a mechanic before the garage you worked for shut down," she stated, not as a question but as a fact. Leo nodded, his throat tight. "We have a program here," she continued, gesturing to the cars around them. "Wheels to work. We recondition donated vehicles and provide them to single-parent families who need transportation to get to their jobs. It's one of our most effective initiatives. But we are understaffed. We need a lead mechanic, someone who understands not just how an engine works, but why it's so important that it does work." She took a step closer, her gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. "This is not a gift, Mr. Morales. It's a job offer. Your resume, the parts of it you shared with me, is your life. You understand what it means to fight to protect a child in a world that isn't kind. That kind of resilience, that unwavering dedication, that is a valuable resource, and I don't waste resources." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't offering him pity, she was offering him respect. She had seen past his poverty, past his desperation, and had identified his strength. In her cold, pragmatic world, his love for his son had been quantified as an asset. It was the strangest, most powerful compliment he had ever received. A dam of pride and fear that had been building inside him for weeks finally broke. For the first time since he'd lost his job, he stood up straight, his shoulders pulling back. The weariness was still etched on his face, but it was now joined by a flicker of something new. Purpose. "I accept," he said, his voice clear and strong. Eleanor Vance gave a single brief nod, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The chasm between their worlds was still terrifyingly vast, but in that moment, in the shared space of a greasy workshop, a fragile, unlikely bridge had just been built. And Leo Morales, for the first time in a very long time, felt like he might just be strong enough to cross it. The seasons turned, painting the city in the muted tones of late autumn, and then the stark whites and greys of winter. 3 months, then 4, wove themselves into a new tapestry of life, one so different from the frayed and desperate threads of that first rainy night. The small, clean apartment Eleanor Vance had provided was no longer just a space with 4 walls and a roof. It had become a home. The sterile white of the refrigerator was now a chaotic gallery of Finn's artwork. Bright red trucks with impossibly large wheels, smiling suns, and stick-figure portraits of him and his father holding hands. The air, once still and silent, was now thick with the scent of Leo's simple but hearty cooking and, more often than not, the sound of Finn's unrestrained laughter echoing down the short hallway. At the foundation, Leo Morales was a man reborn. The weary slump in his shoulders had been replaced by a straight-backed confidence, the deep-seated exhaustion in his eyes giving way to the clear, focused light of purpose. He moved through the cavernous garage of Vance Philanthropic Innovations with a quiet authority, his hands, once calloused from 100-odd jobs, now expertly diagnosing a faulty engine or patiently showing a younger mechanic the precise way to true a wheel. He didn't just fix cars. He restored a piece of the dignity that families lost when a simple breakdown meant choosing between a repair and putting food on the table. He understood that struggle intimately, and it made him not just a good mechanic, but a compassionate leader. His competence did not go unnoticed. Eleanor, on her increasingly frequent visits to the foundation, would often observe him from a distance, watching the easy respect he commanded from his team and the gentle way he spoke to the families they served. He never sought her approval, which, paradoxically, made her respect him all the more. For Eleanor, these visits were becoming less about oversight and more about escape. Back in the sterile glass and steel monolith of Vance Industries headquarters, the world was a series of projections, profit margins, and strategic acquisitions. She could command a boardroom of powerful men with a single quiet sentence, moving billions of dollars like pieces on a chessboard. Yet the victories felt increasingly hollow. During one marathon meeting about a hostile takeover, she found her mind drifting. The sharp lines of a declining stock chart blurred, momentarily replaced by the vibrant, crayon-smeared image of a red truck Finn had proudly gifted her, which she now kept tucked inside her leather portfolio. The drone of the chief financial officer faded into the memory of Leo's low, steady voice, explaining how they had retrofitted a van with a wheelchair lift for a single mother, an act that had cost the foundation a few $1,000s but had given a family back its freedom. The contrast was a chasm that was widening inside her. Her life's work, the empire she had built from scratch, suddenly felt like an elaborate gilded cage. The Lumina Room, which she could see from her corner office window, a glittering jewel atop a rival skyscraper, had become a monument to her isolation. She hadn't set foot in it since that night. The thought of its oppressive quiet, the single place setting, the polite, empty chatter of the surrounding tables, it all felt like a life that belonged to someone else. Her no-touch emotional barrier, the impenetrable fortress she had spent decades constructing, was beginning to show cracks, hairline fissures that let in slivers of an unfamiliar warmth. The fissures widened not in grand, dramatic moments, but in the small, quiet interactions that now punctuated her weeks. One afternoon, she arrived at the foundation's garage to review some budget proposals with Leo. She found him not in his small office, but on his knees beside a dismantled engine, with Finn sitting cross-legged on a nearby stool, meticulously sorting bolts into a magnetic tray. Finn's face lit up when he saw her. "Eleanor, Dad's fixing the heart of the car," he announced, his voice filled with reverence. Leo looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek, and a smile touched his lips before he could stop it. "Finn's my quality control supervisor today," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "He makes sure no bolts go missing." Eleanor felt an answering smile form on her own face, a genuine, uncalculated expression that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. "A very important job," she agreed, her gaze softening as she looked at the boy. Finn, emboldened, slid off the stool and came over, holding up a drawing. It was another truck, this one blue, with a large scrawled EV on the door. "It's for you," he said. "It's the Eleanor Vance truck. It helps people." Her breath caught in her throat. For years, her name on buildings had been a symbol of power, of financial dominance. To this child, it meant help. She knelt, her expensive silk blouse brushing against the dusty concrete floor without a second thought, and accepted the drawing as if it were a priceless contract. "Thank you, Finn. It's the best truck I've ever seen." Later, as Finn was happily occupied with a juice box and a book in the office, she and Leo went over the paperwork. A difficult case had come up. A family of 6 living in a rural area, whose only vehicle, an ancient minivan, had completely died. The repair costs were astronomical, almost more than the vehicle was worth. "The protocol says we should offer them a voucher for a replacement," Leo said, pointing to the line item, his brow furrowed with concern. "But there are no used minivans in our network right now that can safely fit 4 kids in car seats. They're stranded." Here, Eleanor was in her element. Her mind, usually occupied with corporate logistics, saw the problem with startling clarity. "The protocol is a guideline, Leo, not a law." "What's the cost of a new engine block versus the voucher amount?" she asked, her voice crisp and businesslike, yet underpinned by a new current of empathy. Leo rattled off the numbers. "And what about our fleet contract with Northway Automotive?" she continued. "We have a discount clause for engine parts. Pull it up." Together, they worked through the problem, not as Billionaire and employee, but as partners. His practical, on-the-ground knowledge combined with her strategic, high-level thinking. They found a solution, a creative, unconventional one that bent the rules but served the mission. In that small, cluttered office, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and coffee, a new dynamic was forged. It wasn't charity, it was collaboration. When they finished, a comfortable silence settled between them. "You're good at this," Leo said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not just the numbers. You see the people behind them." It was the most profound compliment she had ever received. It meant more than any headline in a business journal, more than any award for corporate leadership. It was a validation not of her power, but of her humanity. That shared smile, the one that lingered for a heartbeat too long, was a silent acknowledgement that something significant was shifting between them, something that neither of them had a name for yet. That evening, back in her cavernous penthouse, the silence felt different. It was no longer a familiar companion, but an aching void. The glittering city lights spread out below her seemed cold and distant. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, Finn's drawing of the blue truck held gently in her hands. This shift within her wasn't just about philanthropy. It was about a deep, unspoken ache, a loneliness so profound she hadn't even allowed herself to name it until now. All her life, she had equated wealth with security, power with purpose. But she had been wrong. Wealth was the laughter of a child who felt safe. Power was the ability to restore a man's dignity. Purpose was the look in a stranger's eyes when they realized they weren't alone. Her gaze drifted across the skyline, landing once again on the Luminar room, its light shining like a cruel, distant star. Her symbol of success, her solitary throne. And in that moment, a radical, impossible, terrifyingly brilliant idea began to sprout in the fertile ground of her transformed heart. The restaurant was a testament to exclusion, a place where a man and his hungry child were an anomaly, an intrusion. What if it could become the opposite? What if her greatest symbol of solitude could be reborn as a beacon of community? The thought was audacious, financially absurd, and flew in the face of everything she had ever built. And yet, it felt like the only thing that made sense, the only path that led away from this magnificent, empty cage. A single, powerful decision crystallized in her mind, a plan taking shape with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to a corporate merger. But this time, the bottom line wasn't profit, it was redemption. The night air, once sharp and indifferent on the 50th floor, now seemed to hold its breath. The Luminar room, a name that had for decades been synonymous with whispered power and cold transactional elegance, was unrecognizable. Gone were the stark, imposing tables spaced for privacy and intimidation. In their place stood warm oak tables arranged for community, adorned not with ostentatious floral arrangements, but with simple, elegant candles whose soft light danced across the faces of the assembled crowd. The very atmosphere felt transformed, the oppressive silence of exclusivity replaced by a vibrant, uncertain hum. New York's elite had turned out in force. Bankers, real estate moguls, art dealers and society columnists, all drawn by the sheer baffling audacity of the invitation. They moved through the space with a hesitant curiosity, their designer shoes treading on floors that had been intentionally scuffed to feel less like a museum and more like a home. Whispers circulated like expensive perfume. "Did you hear she's liquidating the restaurant's wine collection? My sources say it's some kind of tax write-off. Vance doesn't do charity. There's an angle, there's always an angle." Then a hush fell as Eleanor Vance walked to the small, unadorned lectern at the front of the room. She wore a simple, deep blue dress, the severe lines of her usual power suits softened into something graceful, almost vulnerable. Her posture was still erect, her presence still commanding, but the icy mask she usually presented to the world had a discernible crack in it. Her eyes, usually scanning for weaknesses and opportunities, swept across the room with a new, quiet intensity. She took a deep breath, a sound so human and unpracticed that it silenced the last of the murmurs. "Good evening," Eleanor began, her voice steady but devoid of its typical corporate chill. "I see many familiar faces here tonight, faces I have negotiated with, competed against, and dined beside in this very room." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. For years, the Lumina Room was a symbol. It was my symbol, a testament to the belief that success was measured by altitude, by exclusivity, by the distance one could place between oneself and the rest of the world. I built my empire on that belief, and from up here I felt powerful, I felt secure, and I was profoundly, utterly alone. The confession was so raw, so unexpected, that a palpable ripple of shock went through the audience. This was not the Eleanor Vance they knew. This was not a calculated business announcement. This was a revelation. "We build walls in this city," she continued, her gaze seeming to connect with each person individually. "Walls of wealth, of status, of ambition. We tell ourselves they are fortresses, meant to protect what we've earned. But over time, those fortresses become prisons. We fill them with beautiful things, but the silence inside them becomes deafening. I lived in that silence. I believed it was the price of victory." She looked toward the large window, at the sprawling city of millions twinkling below. Until one night, a simple, desperate act of love and survival walked through those doors, and in an instant it shattered every wall I had ever built. The press corps scribbled furiously, their cynical expressions replaced by rapt attention. Eleanor's voice grew softer, imbued with an emotion that felt entirely genuine. "I learned that true wealth is not an asset you can acquire. It is a connection you must be willing to receive. It is not found in the solitude of a penthouse, but in the simple, profound act of pulling up a chair for someone who needs it. It's the realization that a bowl of soup shared in a moment of need holds more value than a 10-course meal eaten in isolation." She paused again, the silence in the room now one of deep, communal reflection. "That is why we are here tonight. The Lumina Room, my monument to solitude, is no more. Tonight it is reborn. Tonight it becomes the open table." As she spoke the new name, soft lights behind her illuminated a simple, elegant sign. The crowd let out a collective soft gasp. This was bigger than a rebrand. It was a revolution. "The open table," Eleanor announced, her voice ringing with newfound purpose, "will be a place where no one is turned away for lack of funds. A place where a hot meal is a right, not a privilege. It will be a beacon of dignity, run not as a charity, but as a community sustained by those who have for those who have not. It is my belief, my new bottom line, that the most valuable investment any of us can ever make is in each other's humanity." The room was stunned into a profound silence. The scale of her action was beginning to dawn on them. She wasn't just donating money. She was sacrificing her ultimate status symbol, transforming it from a temple of the 1% into a sanctuary for all. "But an idea, no matter how powerful, is nothing without the right people to bring it to life," Eleanor said, a true, warm smile finally reaching her eyes. "This project is not truly mine. It belongs to the person who inspired it. A person who taught me more about strength, resilience and integrity in a few short months than I learned in 30 years of boardroom battles. It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the man who will be managing the open table." She turned to the side of the stage. "Mr. Leo Morales." From the wings, Leo walked into the light. He wore a simple but perfectly tailored dark suit, a gift from Eleanor he had at first resisted. He did not look like one of them, but he did not look out of place. He radiated a quiet confidence, a solid, grounded dignity that seemed to anchor the entire room. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, steady light. He walked to Eleanor's side and she placed a hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of partnership and deep respect that did not go unnoticed. The whispers started again, frantic this time. "Morales? I don't know that name. Is he from a rival company?" "Look at him. He's nobody." Leo didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Eleanor, a silent exchange of gratitude passing between them. He then stepped to the microphone. His voice was calm and clear. "Thank you, Ms. Vance. I'm not a public speaker, and I'm not a businessman." He looked out at the sea of confused, wealthy faces. "Not long ago, my son and I had nowhere to go. We were hungry and we were cold. All we had was each other. In this city, that can make you feel invisible." And then came the final, perfect piece of Eleanor's plan. From the side of the stage, a small figure emerged, walking with a child's uncontainable energy. It was Finn. He wore a neat little vest over a crisp white shirt and carried a small basket of fresh bread rolls. He walked straight to Leo, his face breaking into a radiant, gap-toothed smile. He offered the basket to his father, his eyes shining with pure, uncomplicated pride. Leo took a roll, his hand briefly resting on his son's head, a gesture of infinite love. That was the moment. That was the picture that broke through every layer of cynicism in the room. The sight of this beautiful, happy child offering bread in what was once the city's most exclusive restaurant, alongside the man who had just spoken of being homeless. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a deafening, emotional crash. This wasn't an angle. This wasn't a tax scheme. This was real. This was a story of human redemption, played out on the most public of stages. A collective gasp, more profound than before, swept through the room. It was the sound of 100 jaded hearts breaking open at once. The journalists stared, pens frozen above their notepads. The billionaires and socialites looked from Eleanor to Leo, to the beaming child. And for the first time, they saw not a corporate maneuver, but a testament to radical compassion. What Eleanor Vance did, transforming her symbol of solitary luxury into a beacon of communal generosity, truly shocked everyone. The silence was finally broken, not by polite applause, but by a thunderous, spontaneous ovation that felt more like a release. People were on their feet, their faces a mixture of awe, admiration, and a humbling self-reflection. Eleanor Vance had not just opened a restaurant, she had opened their eyes. She had used her immense power not to acquire more, but to give it away in the most meaningful way possible, proving that the deepest redemption and the truest wealth could come from the most unexpected acts of human connection. The transformation of the Lumina Room into the open table was more than a change of name and menu. It was a seismic shift in the city's consciousness. What began as a bewildering act of corporate philanthropy quickly became a living, breathing testament to a different kind of success. The initial news cycle, hungry for the novelty of a billionaire forsaking exclusivity for charity, eventually gave way to something deeper. Reporters who came expecting a sterile performative soup kitchen left with stories of genuine warmth, of a place where the clatter of silverware was punctuated by easy laughter instead of the strained whispers of power brokers. Eleanor Vance, once the subject of articles that praised her ruthless efficiency and calculated acquisitions, was now described in softer, more profound terms: a visionary, a community builder, a woman who had rediscovered the soul of her city. This new reality echoed most powerfully, not in the headlines, but in the quiet, sunlit rooms of the small apartment that had become a true sanctuary for Leo and Finn. The lingering scent of fear and desperation from their first night had long since been replaced by the comforting aroma of Leo's cooking and the faint, crayon-like smell of Finn's artistic endeavors. The space was no longer just a shelter. It was a home, filled with the irrefutable evidence of a life being rebuilt. Finn's drawings, once small and hesitant, now exploded with color and confidence, taped proudly across the refrigerator and the walls of his bedroom. Red trucks still featured prominently, but they were now joined by sprawling cityscapes, smiling portraits of his father, and, increasingly, a tall woman with kind eyes who often stood beside them. Leo moved with a renewed sense of purpose that straightened his shoulders and cleared the chronic exhaustion from his gaze. At the open table, he was not just an employee, he was a leader, his quiet competence and innate empathy making him the operational heart of the entire endeavor. He managed supply chains with the same meticulous care he once used to fix a sputtering engine, ensuring every meal served was not just nourishing, but prepared and delivered with the dignity he knew every guest deserved. He had found more than a job. He had reclaimed his worth, not as a gift given to him, but as a quality that had been there all along, finally given the space to flourish. The formal barrier that had once defined his relationship with Eleanor had eroded so completely it seemed a relic of another lifetime. Their interactions were now a comfortable blend of professional collaboration and a quiet, deepening friendship. They would often sit together in a corner booth after the last guest had departed, discussing inventory and staffing, but the conversations would inevitably drift. They spoke of Finn's progress in school, of Leo's hopes for his son's future, of the unexpected challenges and surprising joys of running a place built on radical compassion. One evening, Eleanor visited the apartment, ostensibly to drop off some new books for Finn. She found him at the small kitchen table, tongue stuck out in concentration as he meticulously colored a drawing. He looked up, his face breaking into a radiant smile. "Look, Eleanor, it's us," he announced, holding up the paper. It depicted 3 figures, one tall and elegantly dressed, one a man with a warm, steady presence, and a small boy holding both their hands, standing in front of a building with a sign that read, "The Open Table." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so potent and unfamiliar it almost took her breath away. For decades, her world had been one of no touch, a self-imposed isolation built to protect her from vulnerability. But looking at the simple, heartfelt drawing, she felt that fortress dissolve into dust. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing Finn's as she took the paper, her touch gentle and unrehearsed. "It's wonderful, Finn," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Truly wonderful." Leo, watching from the doorway, felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He saw not a powerful CEO and her beneficiaries, but something far more organic and real. An unconventional family, forged in a moment of desperation and sustained by mutual respect and a quiet, unspoken affection. The no-touch barrier had not just been broken for Eleanor, it had vanished for all of them, replaced by the easy intimacy of people who had come to rely on each other's presence. The next day, Eleanor had Finn's drawing framed. She didn't hang it in her sterile high-rise office, a space that felt increasingly foreign to her. Instead, she brought it to the Vance Philanthropic Innovations Foundation, hanging it in the main lobby where everyone could see it. "A reminder," she explained to a curious staff member, "of why we do what we do." Soon, the walls of the foundation began to fill with more of Finn's work, vibrant, joyful pieces of art that infused the professional space with a powerful dose of humanity. His boundless spirit, once a tiny, shivering flame, had become a beacon, illuminating the true purpose of her vast empire. Months melted into a year, and the rhythm of their new life became a steady, comforting drumbeat. The Open Table thrived, inspiring similar initiatives across the city and fundamentally altering the public conversation about hunger and dignity. Eleanor found she spent less and less time in the boardroom and more time at the restaurant, not as its owner, but as a participant. She learned the names of the regulars, listened to their stories, and discovered a sense of belonging in the shared humanity of the crowded room that 1,000 solitary dinners in the Lumina room could never provide. Her sharp business acumen was still present, but it was now tempered with a wisdom that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. One cool autumn evening, a year after their first meeting, the restaurant was winding down. A soft jazz tune played over the speakers, and the low hum of contented conversation filled the air. Leo was doing a final check of the kitchen, and Finn was diligently wiping down a table, mimicking his father with a charming seriousness. Eleanor sat at their usual corner booth, nursing a cup of tea, simply watching them. She saw Leo place a gentle hand on Finn's shoulder, praising his work, and Finn beamed up at him with pure, unadulterated love. In that quiet, unguarded moment, the full weight of her transformation settled upon her. She thought of the woman she used to be, isolated, powerful, and profoundly lonely, measuring her life in stock prices and acquisitions. She had possessed everything the world defined as wealth, Yet she had been starving for the one thing that truly mattered. A single tear, unbidden and warm, traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. Leo noticed and walked over, his expression softening with concern. "Everything okay, Eleanor?" She looked up at him and then at Finn, who had run over to show her a shiny coin he'd found. She smiled, a genuine, unburdened expression that reached her eyes and illuminated her entire face. She reached out, her hand resting over Finn's small one on the table, her gaze meeting Leo's. "Everything," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide, "is finally perfect." She looked at them both, the father who had taught her about strength and the son who had taught her about joy. "You two," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you reminded me what true wealth really is." It wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending sealed with a dramatic flourish. It was something far more real and enduring. It was the beginning of an ongoing journey, a testament to the quiet, revolutionary truth that a single genuine act of humanity, the simple, profound decision to pull up a chair for someone in need, possesses the power not just to rewrite a destiny, but to transform a world.